Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore one of the stranger and more unexpected habits of a 17th century monarch, the use of snakes as a way to relax. Yes, you heard that right, King Charles II of England, one of the most eccentric kings in history, had a special fondness for snakes. While most people today might shy away from handling snakes, Charles II found them to be the perfect way to unwind. Imagine being in the royal court, the air thick with the scent of opulence, and there, amid the grandeur, King Charles II is calmly holding a snake, finding solace in its quiet presence. It's not your typical image of a king, is it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, feel free to share where you're tuning in from and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious to hear from listeners around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. King Charles II, crowned in 1660, after the English monarchy was restored, was known for his charisma, wit, and lively court. However, one of his most unusual habits, his love for snakes, has become part of the lore surrounding his reign. The idea of a king relaxing with such an unexpected companion, handling snakes as a form of leisure, sounds like something out of a storybook, but it's true. For Charles II, these serpentine creatures weren't just fascinating animals, they were therapeutic companions that helped him find peace amidst the chaos of royal life. And as strange as it may seem, his fondness for snakes says a lot about his character, his personal quirks, and perhaps even how he approached the pressures of being a ruler. Tonight, we'll take a closer look at why King Charles II developed this unusual relationship with snakes and how it fit into the broader picture of his reign. From the moment he embraced these creatures, the world saw a monarch who wasn't afraid to break away from traditional royal habits, creating a legacy that was as eccentric as it was fascinating. To understand why King Charles II took such a liking to snakes, we first need to look at his deep affection for nature. This was not just a passing interest, it was an essential part of his identity. Unlike many of his royal counterparts, Charles wasn't just concerned with royal duties, political maneuvers, or lavish palaces. He genuinely enjoyed the natural world, particularly animals. His love for nature extended beyond mere hunting expeditions. He was fascinated by all kinds of creatures, from birds and dogs to reptiles. He even had a reputation for keeping a menagerie of animals at court, which included everything from exotic birds to the humble garden snake. Charles was an avid lover of the outdoors. He often spent hours walking in the royal parks or taking horseback rides through the countryside, enjoying the freedom that came with being in nature. For a king constantly embroiled in the pressures of leadership and the complexities of court life, these escapes into nature were vital for his well-being. Interestingly, these outdoor excursions weren't just about recreation, they were essential to his mental relaxation. Being close to nature allowed him to step away from the political intrigues and social expectations that came with being monarch. In fact, nature became one of his primary means of self-care, offering him peace and solace when the weight of the crown grew heavy. One of Charles's greatest influences in his love for nature came from his upbringing. As a young prince in exile during the English Civil War, Charles spent time in European courts where nature and animal care were appreciated. He was exposed to a variety of natural environments, and this shaped his view of the world. When he returned to England as king, he brought with him a wealth of experience and a deep respect for the natural world. He believed that contact with nature was a form of therapy, a belief that guided much of his approach to relaxation and leisure. Charles's affection for animals, and especially his relationship with snakes, wasn't an isolated eccentricity, it was part of a broader trend of animal appreciation that marked his reign. During his time, many nobles and royalty began to take a keen interest in the natural sciences. They supported botanical gardens, animal studies, and scientific explorations into the natural world. But Charles, with his whimsical, almost romantic view of animals, took this appreciation a step further. He didn't just admire animals from a distance, he engaged with them on a personal level. Historians still argue about how much of Charles II's love for nature was a form of relaxation and how much was tied to his desire to distinguish himself from other monarchs. Was his interest in animals purely therapeutic, or was it an attempt to present himself as a ruler who was not bound by the stiff traditions of royal life? Some scholars suggest that his love for nature, and his comfort with keeping snakes as pets, was a symbol of his individuality, a quiet rebellion against the formality and expectations of courtly life. Others believe that Charles genuinely found joy and peace in the simple act of connecting with the living creatures around him. As you settle in for your own restful sleep tonight, imagine the peaceful, calming effect nature must have had on Charles II. Like him, perhaps we all need a small piece of the natural world to quiet our minds and soothe our souls. Whether it's a brief walk outside, the sound of a bird in the distance, or simply the idea of being surrounded by the peaceful quiet of nature, we can all find some comfort in the world that exists outside of our daily concerns. For Charles, it was his connection with animals, especially snakes, that offered him a form of relaxation. And maybe, just maybe, his example can remind us to embrace the little things in life that bring us calm. While King Charles II's deep affection for nature is well documented, the question remains, how did snakes become a central part of his royal life, and why did he find them so relaxing? To understand this, we need to look at the role of snakes in the royal court and the way they were perceived during the 17th century. Snakes, particularly the ones that Charles kept, were seen as both a curiosity and a symbol of mystery, which likely drew the king to them in the first place. Their unusual and captivating nature made them ideal companions for a monarch who sought something different from the conventional royal pastimes. In the royal court, exotic pets were a popular trend among the aristocracy, especially during Charles II's reign. Kings and nobles kept everything from parrots to monkeys, seeking to impress with rare and unusual creatures. But Charles II, ever the eccentric, took his fascination to another level by choosing snakes as his companions. He didn't just view them as pets in the traditional sense, he saw them as a form of personal relaxation. The presence of snakes in his royal chambers was likely a way for him to escape the pressures of court life, something that allowed him to unwind without the demands of the aristocratic world weighing down on him. Snakes also had a long history of symbolism in various cultures, including the ancient world. They were often associated with wisdom, transformation, and even healing. For Charles II, these symbolic meanings may have played a role in his attraction to them. The quiet, measured movements of a snake, coupled with its connection to ancient mysticism and rejuvenation, likely provided the king with a sense of calm. In a world filled with political intrigue and courtly expectations, the snakes became a rare form of peace, something to soothe his mind after a long day. Interestingly, Charles II wasn't the only royal figure to keep snakes as pets during this period. Other European rulers, such as King Louis XIV of France, had similar tastes in animals. This growing trend could be linked to the rise of interest in the natural world during the 17th century, driven by both the early days of scientific exploration and the fascination with the exotic. The exotic pet trade was growing, and rulers across Europe were collecting animals not just for their beauty but for their rare and unique qualities. Snakes, with their sleek, silent movements and ancient connotations, were especially appealing to those who sought an animal that represented both mystery and majesty. Historians still argue whether Charles II's relationship with snakes was more than just a passing interest or if it reflected a deeper psychological need. Some scholars suggest that snakes provided the king with an escape from the pressures of leadership, offering him moments of introspection and peace. Others believe that, in keeping snakes, he was making a statement, one that represented his defiance of traditional royal expectations. The fact that Charles was comfortable enough with these serpents to handle them in a way that could be considered almost meditative suggests that he sought solace in their presence, viewing them as a way to relax and disconnect from the demands of ruling an empire. As you rest tonight, think of Charles II, his royal chambers, and the curious comfort he found in the presence of his snakes. Maybe it wasn't just the physical act of holding them that relaxed him, but the quietness of the moment itself, the gentle, rhythmic movements of the snakes, their calm presence offering him a refuge from a world of noise and chaos. Like Charles II, perhaps we too can find comfort in moments of quiet stillness, where the world slips away, and we are left with peace. As we continue our exploration of King Charles II's love for snakes, we should also take a moment to consider the deeper symbolic meanings behind his fascination. Snakes in the 17th century were far more than just curious creatures to be collected, they were also potent symbols. In many cultures, including ancient Egypt and Greece, snakes had strong associations with power, wisdom, and transformation. For Charles II, snakes were not merely pets, they were a symbol of his personal authority and his reign as king. To understand this, let's step back and look at the larger cultural context of the time. In the 17th century, monarchy was often portrayed as a symbol of unyielding power, and royal pets were frequently chosen for their connection to grandeur and majesty. Many monarchs sought animals that could reflect their strength, power, and control over nature, and what better creature to do so than the snake? Silent, slithering, and capable of great transformation, the snake embodies a sense of mystery and control, which makes it a fitting metaphor for a monarch's ability to rule over both the seen and unseen. For Charles II, a king with a reputation for both charm and eccentricity, the snake served as a quiet but powerful reminder of his royal stature. By surrounding himself with such a symbol of mystery and power, he communicated to the court and the public that he was, in a way, above the ordinary. His ownership of snakes may have been an extension of his personality, marking him as a ruler who didn't conform to the rigid and predictable expectations of royalty. Instead, he embraced an air of unpredictability, much like the snake itself. This unpredictability, coupled with the inherent majesty of the serpent, set Charles II apart from other monarchs who stuck to more traditional symbols of power. It's also worth considering the ancient symbolism attached to the snake in relation to kingship. In many ancient cultures, such as the Egyptians, snakes were viewed as protectors of royalty, often depicted in art and iconography as guardians of the throne. The cobra, in particular, was considered a symbol of sovereignty and divine authority. The use of snakes in royal settings wasn't just a matter of aesthetics, it was a way to project power, to associate oneself with the protective and transformative qualities of the serpent. In this context, Charles II's love for snakes could be seen as an attempt to align himself with these ancient ideas of sovereignty and majesty. Historians still argue about how much Charles's use of snakes as symbols of power was intentional, versus how much it was simply a personal preference or a quirky indulgence. Some suggest that his use of snakes was a calculated move to enhance his image as a ruler, reinforcing his connection to ancient royal symbolism. Others argue that his affection for snakes was more personal and private, a comfort for him in moments of stress or anxiety, rather than a public symbol of power. However, regardless of his intentions, the fact remains that snakes became a part of his royal identity, a symbol that spoke to his connection to the divine and his position at the top of the social hierarchy. Whether he saw them as symbols of personal power or simply as creatures that brought him peace, the snake remained a quiet yet potent force in his court. It wasn't just about their literal presence, it was about the larger ideas they represented: control, mystery, and transformation. Like the monarch himself, the snake moved through the world in a way that was both quiet and powerful, embodying the type of ruler Charles II aspired to be. So, as you drift into your own peaceful sleep tonight, think about the snake as a symbol of quiet strength. Just as Charles II found solace and power in their presence, you too can find calm in the most unexpected places, whether it's the quiet moments of the night or the unexpected moments of life where true strength lies in stillness. Just like the snake, sometimes it's the quiet power that speaks the loudest. We've explored the symbolic importance of snakes for King Charles II, but now let's focus on the more personal and physical aspects of his relationship with these creatures. Why did he choose snakes as a form of relaxation, and what effects did handling them have on him? While the idea of being around snakes might send many into a panic, Charles II, with his calm and composed demeanor, found a certain peace and therapeutic benefit from his interactions with these creatures. Snake handling, it turns out, had a calming effect on Charles II. The simple act of gently holding or interacting with the snake may have offered a sense of control over something unpredictable, and in turn, that control helped the king relax. It's known that Charles, like many other people who seek comfort from animals, found that the rhythm of handling a snake, the smooth, deliberate motions, had a calming, almost meditative quality. The snake's movement, quiet and deliberate, contrasted with the chaos and stress that often surrounded the royal court, providing a form of escape for the king. Imagine it, Charles sitting quietly in his private quarters, perhaps with a snake coiled gently in his hands, the world around him a blur of courtly politics and high drama. Yet in that moment, he was focused solely on the smooth, undulating movements of the snake. It's a moment of calm that's hard to imagine amidst the usual bustle of royal life, but it's easy to see why such an activity would have been appealing to someone in his position. The act of handling snakes could have helped him ground himself in the present, away from the complexities of kingship. Historians still debate whether Charles II's relationship with his snakes was merely a quirky hobby or whether it had a therapeutic, almost psychological component to it. Some suggest that Charles's fondness for snakes may have been linked to his need for calm in an often chaotic life. As a monarch, his days were filled with decisions that affected the lives of many, and his personal life was marred by both political intrigue and personal heartache. The presence of his snakes, therefore, could have provided him with a way to mentally detach from the weight of his crown, offering a therapeutic release from the constant demands of being king. There is also the element of tactile sensation, the feeling of the snake's smooth scales, its cool body winding through the king's hands, may have provided Charles with a momentary reprieve from the heavy armor of court life. In a way, handling snakes was like engaging in a form of relaxation that connected him to a slower, more grounded pace. The rhythmic sensation of holding and watching the snake's body could have induced a meditative state, helping him clear his mind before he returned to the demands of his role. Yet the reality is that we'll never truly know whether the physical and psychological effects of snake handling were as calming for Charles II as they might sound. Some historians have suggested that his fondness for snakes could have been a coping mechanism, something to help him manage stress or mental fatigue. Others argue that it was simply another eccentricity, something that didn't necessarily serve a deeper purpose but instead added to the color of his personality. The debate continues, but what's clear is that, in a time when monarchs were expected to maintain an air of decorum and grace under pressure, Charles II's relationship with his snakes was, in its own way, an outlet for personal comfort and a form of self-care. As you ease into your own restful sleep tonight, imagine the calming, rhythmic movements of a snake as it slithers gently through your hands. While the image of a snake might seem intimidating or unsettling to some, consider the peaceful, steady motions that Charles II likely found in his snakes, an opportunity to center himself amidst the whirlwind of royal life. And, in your own way, find comfort in the quiet moments of stillness, where you can take a breath and escape the busyness of the world around you. Now that we've explored how King Charles II found relaxation in the presence of snakes, it's time to take a step into the world of 17th century medicine. Charles's love for snakes wasn't just a personal quirk, it was also aligned with the prevailing medicinal practices of the time. In the 17th century, the study of natural history and the use of animals for therapeutic purposes was growing, and snakes, with their ancient connections to healing and mysticism, were seen as important creatures in these practices. In fact, snakes had long been associated with medicine and healing, both in ancient and medieval traditions. The staff of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, was depicted with a snake wrapped around it, symbolizing the ancient belief in the snake's ability to heal. This image persisted throughout the centuries, influencing European views on snakes and their role in medicine. In the 17th century, the notion that snakes could have healing properties was still popular, and various parts of the snake, its venom, its blood, and even its skin, were believed to have medicinal value. Charles II, being a man of his time, would have likely been aware of these ideas and may have even incorporated them into his personal health practices. Historians still argue whether King Charles II's use of snakes was purely recreational or if it was also tied to a belief in their healing powers. Some suggest that Charles might have been drawn to the snake's associations with medicine, as they were often thought to possess restorative properties. Snake venom, for example, was sometimes used in small doses to treat ailments such as headaches or chronic pain, and in some cultures, snake oils were applied as remedies for various conditions. It's possible that Charles, in his search for relaxation and wellness, was also aware of the snake's role in the broader context of medicine and healing. At the time, medical practices were a mixture of folk remedies, early scientific exploration, and ancient traditions. The use of snake venom in medicine was well established, particularly in the form of serpentaria, a tincture made from snake venom. It was thought to have a variety of healing properties, including the ability to treat wounds, prevent infection, and ease pain. While the understanding of medicine was still rudimentary by modern standards, the belief in the medicinal power of snakes was widely accepted in 17th century Europe. Charles II, with his broad interests and intellectual curiosity, may have been drawn to these beliefs, incorporating snakes into his personal health regimen. Perhaps he saw them not only as a means of relaxation but also as a form of holistic healing, a way to connect with both nature and ancient traditions of wellness. This connection between his fondness for snakes and the medicinal practices of the time shows how even the most eccentric habits can be influenced by the medical knowledge, and, at times, the mysticism, of the era. Interestingly, the use of snakes in medical treatments wasn't confined to Europe. In the Middle East and Asia, snake venom and other snake-derived products were also used in healing practices. The trade in snake-based remedies was a global enterprise, with people from different cultures seeking out the venom, blood, and even the skin of snakes for their supposed therapeutic benefits. For Charles II, a king who had spent time in exile in France and other parts of Europe, the fascination with snakes may have been part of a broader interest in the natural world and alternative health practices. Historians still debate the extent to which these snake-related remedies were genuinely effective or if they were more about superstition. Some suggest that the psychological benefit of using snake-based treatments may have been just as important as any potential physical benefit. The idea of using a creature associated with mystery, death, and regeneration could have been a powerful psychological tool for healing, providing comfort and relief simply through the ritual of treatment. Others argue that the actual medicinal properties of snake venom were limited, and the belief in its effectiveness was mostly based on folklore and tradition. As you ease into your own rest tonight, think of the long history of snake symbolism in medicine. Just as the Egyptians believed in the healing power of snakes, and Charles II sought relaxation through them, there are still today places in the world where snake venom and its derivatives are believed to have medicinal qualities. Perhaps, like the snake's quiet, winding movement, we can find solace and healing in unexpected places, whether it's through rituals, traditions, or simply allowing ourselves the space to rest. As we move through King Charles II's relationship with snakes, let's take a look at where this peculiar hobby unfolded, his private reptile room. In a royal palace surrounded by luxury, the king's personal space was filled with treasures, fine furniture, and a number of exotic creatures, including, of course, his beloved snakes. While it might seem unusual to picture a monarch surrounded by slithering creatures, for Charles II, his reptile room was not just a space for the animals, it was a sanctuary. A place where he could retreat from the demands of royalty and the constant pressures of court life. Picture it, a room dimly lit, perhaps filled with the faint hissing of snakes as they moved through the space. The walls might have been lined with glass or wooden enclosures, each housing a different species of snake that Charles II kept as a companion. As strange as it seems today, this was a space where the king could find peace, something that many royals, especially in such a turbulent time, struggled to find. The world outside was one of political intrigue, royal scheming, and endless responsibilities, but inside this room, Charles could connect with something far simpler. In a strange way, the snakes offered him a form of tranquility that allowed him to escape from the chaos of his life. This private reptile room was more than just a place to house snakes, it was a space for reflection and personal time away from the public eye. In the 17th century, the concept of personal space wasn't quite the same as it is today, but Charles II certainly valued his time in this secluded room. For the king, there was something calming about the silence and stillness of his snakes. While the rest of the palace buzzed with the court's activities, he could retreat into his room and find solace with his snakes. This was perhaps the one place where he could truly be himself, away from the heavy responsibilities of leadership and the incessant demands of courtly life. Historians have often debated what, exactly, Charles II found so comforting about being surrounded by snakes. Was it the serenity of the creatures, or did the room offer him a refuge from the constant pressure of being a monarch? After all, kingship is rarely a restful affair. It's filled with endless meetings, decisions, and the weight of responsibility that never leaves a monarch's shoulders. For Charles II, perhaps the presence of his snakes allowed him to find a moment of peace, something so rare in the life of a king. It wasn't just about the reptiles themselves, but the quiet, contemplative time he spent in their company. Some historians suggest that Charles II's love for snakes in such a private setting was a way for him to assert control over something, to experience a kind of serenity that the complexities of royal life made impossible. Snakes, being relatively solitary and silent creatures, may have served as the perfect companions for a man who, at times, had little control over the noise and demands of the court. In a world filled with grandiose displays of power, wealth, and dominance, the presence of snakes, who required no such grand gestures, only patience and care, could have been a form of escape, a quiet contrast to the often exhausting rituals of being king. Historians still argue whether this private room, and Charles II's relationship with the snakes, was more of an indulgence or a true necessity for the king. Some see it as a quirky hobby, a royal eccentricity that was part of his charm and appeal. Others suggest that his affinity for the reptiles was more of a coping mechanism, providing him with a sanctuary where he could process his emotions and clear his mind. Whatever the true nature of his attachment to the snakes, it's clear that they played a significant role in his life. This reptile room, unlike the rest of the bustling palace, offered him a moment of solitude, a break from the responsibilities of kingship. As you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine stepping into that room with Charles II, just you, him, and the quiet, slithering snakes around you. What might it have felt like for the king, to be surrounded by the calm presence of these creatures, taking a moment to breathe and escape the world's demands? Perhaps it's a reminder that, even in the most tumultuous of lives, we all need a space to find our own peace, a quiet retreat where we can reflect and unwind. As we reflect on King Charles II's fondness for his snakes, it's worth considering the psychological impact this unusual hobby may have had on him. The presence of these serpents in his private room wasn't just a quirky royal pastime, it might have served as a form of emotional and mental release for a king who, despite his charm and popularity, faced the constant pressures of leadership. The debate among historians about the psychological need Charles II might have had for his snakes is one that reveals much about the personal toll of royalty, and how individuals in such high positions of power sometimes turn to seemingly strange outlets to manage their mental and emotional well-being. At first glance, it may seem like just another eccentricity, one of the many quirks that made Charles II the colorful figure he was. After all, kings were expected to entertain themselves with grandiose hobbies, falconry, hunting, elaborate feasts, and so on. But Charles's choice of snakes as companions stood out. It wasn't just the snakes themselves that fascinated him, but the way he interacted with them. He found peace in their company, and this was a rarity for a monarch whose life was filled with political scheming, court drama, and the heavy responsibilities of ruling an empire. Some historians believe that Charles's affection for snakes was a way for him to find personal space and mental calm, something he couldn't easily come by in the royal court. During his reign, Charles was known for his affable and relaxed demeanor, but this public persona might have been a mask for the stress he faced. The constant pressure of ruling, the political unrest of the time, and the personal toll of courtly intrigues could have made him yearn for something quieter, something that allowed him to escape the noise of the world. Snakes, with their slow, deliberate movements and tranquil presence, would have offered just that. They weren't demanding, and their company didn't come with the expectations that other royal pursuits did. The simple act of handling snakes could have provided Charles with a break from the constant hustle and bustle of his royal duties. It's possible that this form of reptilian relaxation allowed him to retreat inwardly, to focus on something other than the endless parade of courtly affairs. However, not all scholars agree on the therapeutic value of the king's snake handling. Some argue that Charles II's fondness for snakes was more of a personal eccentricity, one that might not have had a deep psychological or therapeutic function. According to this view, the king's relationship with his snakes was just another quirky part of his charm, something that added to his already colorful and lively court. After all, royal life in the 17th century was full of extravagant and unusual habits, and a king as beloved as Charles II would have been expected to entertain his subjects with his quirks and eccentricities. Some historians suggest that Charles simply enjoyed the novelty of having such an unusual pet, without any deeper need for relaxation or emotional healing. Yet, despite the uncertainty about the psychological motivations behind Charles II's love of snakes, there's no denying that this peculiar hobby became an iconic part of his reign. Kingship, especially in the 17th century, was a deeply stressful position. Constantly surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and political figures, Charles II would have had little personal time to himself. It's easy to see why, given the stress and the ever-present demands of his court, he might have turned to snakes as a way to create a moment of calm and focus. Their quiet presence, devoid of the expectations and drama that came with other royal activities, would have offered him a brief respite from his high-pressure life. Historians still argue whether the snakes were truly a psychological necessity for Charles or merely a charming idiosyncrasy. Some believe the act of handling snakes was akin to modern-day mindfulness or meditation, allowing the mind to rest in a focused and calming task. Others maintain that it was simply a personal preference, a hobby that Charles found amusing but which didn't serve any deeper emotional purpose. Either way, the presence of the snakes in the royal court highlights an important aspect of Charles II's reign, his need for peace and escape, however unconventional that escape might have been. As you settle in tonight, think about Charles II sitting quietly with his snakes, the soft hiss and gentle movements of the creatures bringing him a sense of calm. In a world full of noise and responsibilities, perhaps we all need a quiet space, a retreat, even if it's just for a moment. Whether it's through the calm presence of nature or the stillness of our own thoughts, we can all find ways to let go of the noise and find our inner peace. Like the king and his snakes, we too can carve out those small, quiet moments of relaxation that allow us to reconnect with ourselves. As we continue to explore the unique hobby of King Charles II and his fascination with snakes, we can begin to see how his eccentric interests spilled over into other aspects of life, including royal fashion. While snakes may seem like an unusual influence on the world of fashion, Charles II's love for them did, in fact, leave an imprint on the way he and his court presented themselves. Much like the rest of his quirky tendencies, his affinity for snakes became an essential part of his persona, which extended even to the fashion trends of the time. During Charles II's reign, fashion in England experienced a significant shift, influenced by the broader European trends of the time. The king was a well-known trendsetter at court, and the fashion in his kingdom became known for its lavishness and decadence. Many of the styles seen at court were borrowed from the French, who were famous for their lavish designs, but Charles II, with his personal eccentricities, incorporated his love of nature and animals into royal fashion. One subtle but notable way that Charles's passion for snakes influenced fashion was in the use of serpent-inspired jewelry. It's said that the king would wear ornate necklaces or rings adorned with snake motifs. The snake, with its associations of power, protection, and mysticism, was an ideal choice for a king who was known for his charismatic and sometimes unpredictable nature. Jewelry featuring snakes became fashionable at court, not just as a decorative piece but as a subtle expression of divine power and strength. It's easy to imagine these delicate serpent-shaped adornments winding their way into the regal outfits of the king and his courtiers, an emblem of the quiet strength Charles found in his reptiles. Additionally, the snake motif began to appear in the broader culture. The more the king embraced his love for snakes, the more this aesthetic found its way into the designs of clothing worn by those close to him. Whether in embroidery, jewelry, or even elaborate fashion designs, the image of the snake became an iconic part of the regal look during Charles II's time. This incorporation of snake imagery not only reflected Charles's personal interests but also communicated something more about the court's approach to power. The serpent was a symbol of both danger and protection, making it a fitting addition to the royal wardrobe. By wearing snake-themed jewelry, courtiers could be seen as embodying the strength and mystery of the king himself, an outward expression of loyalty to the monarch and his unique, personal style. Historians still debate the full extent of the influence of Charles II's snake-related hobbies on fashion. Some argue that the connection between the king's personal interests and the court's fashion choices was more superficial, a passing trend driven by the king's own eccentricities. Others suggest that the snake motif served as a deeper symbol of power, protection, and rebirth, values that were important both to Charles II's reign and to the larger Baroque period, which was marked by an emphasis on opulence and symbolic meaning. Regardless of the depth of the influence, it's clear that Charles II's passion for snakes did indeed leave its mark on the way the royal court presented itself to the world. Even today, the serpentine motifs from the 17th century can be seen in the designs of modern fashion, proving that the symbolism of the snake, and the king's unique flair for incorporating it into his life, has endured. Edition. While Charles II may not have known that his love for reptiles would go on to influence trends hundreds of years later, his fascination with snakes remains one of the many ways in which he made his reign a bit more colorful and unpredictable. As you settle into your own peaceful sleep tonight, think of the subtle ways in which our personal tastes and quirks can influence the world around us. Charles II's love for snakes, in the end, was more than just a royal eccentricity, it was a part of who he was, a king whose uniqueness shaped the very fabric of his reign. And like the quiet, serpentine patterns woven into royal fashion, our own idiosyncrasies and passions can leave an imprint on the world in ways we might never expect. Now that we've explored the influence of Charles II's snake handling on fashion and royal life, let's take a look at the broader picture of how this eccentric king found relaxation and unwound during his reign. Charles II was known for his charismatic personality, his ability to charm the court, and his flair for extravagant entertainment. However, underneath his public image, there was a man who, like anyone else, had to find ways to cope with the pressures of kingship and the constant demands of ruling a kingdom. Beyond his love for snakes, Charles employed a variety of techniques to relax and refresh himself, and they shed light on the lengths this king went to in order to escape from the weight of the crown. One of the king's favorite methods of relaxation was spending time outdoors. He was an avid hunter, and hunting was not only a way for him to unwind but also a popular pastime among the elite. Imagine Charles, dressed in his royal hunting attire, riding through the countryside, the sound of hounds in the distance and the rustling of the trees overhead. Hunting allowed him to escape the palace's rigid formality, offering an opportunity to connect with nature while still maintaining a sense of royal duty. Though this activity was not as tranquil as handling snakes, it provided a different kind of relaxation, one that involved physical activity, a chance to bond with his companions, and a break from courtly politics. Dancing, too, was one of Charles II's favorite pastimes. His court was known for its vibrant social scene, filled with balls and dances. Charles himself was an accomplished dancer, and the art of dance was one way he connected with the noble class. The lively and joyous environment of the ballrooms offered an energetic release from the weight of governance. In these settings, Charles could lose himself in the rhythm of music and the pleasure of socializing. Dance allowed the king to temporarily set aside the affairs of the state and enjoy the company of others in a more relaxed, jovial atmosphere. Historians still argue about how much of Charles II's personal relaxation techniques were linked to his need to escape the demands of kingship. Some suggest that his hobbies, whether it was snake handling, hunting, or dancing, were forms of stress relief in a life that was often filled with political intrigue, war, and personal challenges. Others believe that these activities were not just about relaxation but about maintaining the image of a charismatic, larger-than-life king who could engage with his court in ways that were both entertaining and memorable. Either way, these activities show that Charles II wasn't just the ruler who sat on his throne, he was a man who actively sought moments of peace and enjoyment, even in the midst of his royal responsibilities. Another form of relaxation that Charles II enjoyed was patronizing the arts. His court was filled with artists, playwrights, and musicians, many of whom were supported by the king. He not only took personal pleasure in the performances and works of art created for him, but he also sought to encourage the flourishing of the arts within England. In the evenings, after a busy day of courtly affairs, Charles often attended plays, operas, and musical performances. These events provided him with an intellectual and emotional escape from the pressures of ruling a country. The theater, in particular, allowed him to engage with the creative energy of his time while offering a reprieve from the stresses of governance. Though Charles's relaxation techniques were varied, they all pointed to one central theme: his need to escape, in different ways, the confines of his royal life. From the quiet presence of his snakes to the energetic hunt, from the elegant ballroom to the cultural vibrancy of the theater, these activities allowed Charles II to find a balance between the pressure of kingship and his need for personal space. The king knew that to be an effective ruler, he needed to recharge, and he did so by embracing a variety of methods that were as diverse and colorful as his personality. Historians still debate how much Charles II's relaxation techniques were born out of necessity versus personal preference. Did he seek these outlets because the pressures of being a king were simply too overwhelming, or did he enjoy these activities as a way of maintaining a connection to the world beyond the courtly affairs? Perhaps it was both. Charles II was a ruler who thrived on engagement, but he also understood the value of moments of solitude and personal enjoyment. The fact that his hobbies, especially his love for snakes, became as legendary as his reign itself speaks to his ability to make time for his own personal peace in the midst of the responsibilities of leadership. As you lie down to sleep tonight, think of Charles II in his private chambers, a snake winding slowly in his hands, or perhaps imagine him stepping out for a quiet moment of relaxation in nature. Whether through his reptiles or his royal pursuits, he found ways to embrace the quiet, calm moments that allowed him to step away from the world's expectations and find peace. Perhaps we, too, can take a page from his book and find moments of relaxation, however unconventional, amidst our busy lives. As we explore King Charles II's relationship with his snakes, it's fascinating to consider how his unusual fondness for reptiles fit into a broader trend among monarchs and aristocrats during the 17th century. Charles was not alone in keeping exotic and unusual pets. In fact, during his reign and the period of European exploration, it was quite fashionable among royalty and the upper classes to collect rare and exotic creatures from across the globe. For Charles, snakes were not the only unusual creatures in his menagerie. His love for animals extended to all manner of exotic pets, including monkeys, parrots, and even lions, all of which added to his reputation as a king who reveled in eccentricity and novelty. The fascination with exotic pets was part of a larger cultural shift during the 17th century, driven by the expanding exploration and trade routes of European powers. As ships made their way to the Americas, Africa, and the Far East, they returned with more than just spices and precious metals. They brought strange and fascinating creatures, some of which were destined for royal courts across Europe. Monarchs saw these animals as symbols of power and wealth. Owning an exotic pet was not just a display of wealth, it was a sign of cultural influence and the ability to control nature. These animals, many of which had never been seen in Europe before, were regarded as treasures, and keeping them was a way for rulers to showcase their prestige. In this context, it's easy to understand why Charles II found snakes to be such appealing companions. Just as other monarchs kept rare and beautiful creatures from foreign lands, Charles chose snakes, creatures both mysterious and powerful in their symbolism. He was, in a sense, participating in the larger royal trend of collecting exotic creatures, while also creating a unique and personal connection with the animals. Snakes, unlike the more conventional pets kept by other monarchs, provided Charles II with a deeper level of engagement, one that connected him to a tradition of animal collection but also allowed him to create an intimacy that was uniquely his. Other European monarchs, including Louis XIV of France, also kept exotic animals, often using them as status symbols in their courts. Louis XIV, like Charles II, was known for his lavish and opulent court, where he surrounded himself with extravagances. He too had a keen interest in animals, including lions, falcons, and other majestic creatures, which were displayed at his palace of Versailles. These exotic animals were not just for personal enjoyment, they were also meant to show off the grandeur of the monarchy, linking the ruler to the majesty of nature and the world's vast, untamed corners. It wasn't just the kings who indulged in exotic pets. In the Netherlands, wealthy merchants and aristocrats also kept rare animals, many of which were seen as a mark of their wealth and success. The craze for exotic animals swept across Europe in the 17th century, as the aristocracy and royalty sought to outdo each other with their rare collections. However, while other monarchs may have been drawn to more grandiose creatures, such as lions or tigers, Charles II's choice to keep snakes showed his unique approach. His snakes weren't merely displays of wealth, they were a personal, almost meditative escape from the intense pressures of court life. Historians still debate how much the collection of exotic pets during this time reflected the personal interests of the monarchs versus their desire to impress or establish dominance. Some suggest that these animals were a way to show off one's wealth and global reach, while others argue that the animals had a deeper connection to the ruler's spiritual or psychological needs. Charles II's love for snakes, while undoubtedly eccentric, also fits into the pattern of monarchs seeking both power and solace through their connections with the natural world. His ability to find relaxation in these reptiles, in particular, suggests that for him, the act of keeping exotic animals wasn't just about status, it was about personal peace and quiet in the face of his demanding royal responsibilities. As you drift into your own peaceful rest tonight, consider how even the most seemingly unusual habits or possessions can serve deeper purposes in a person's life. Just as Charles II found relaxation in his snakes, perhaps we too can find moments of comfort and peace in the things we hold close, whether they are objects, rituals, or simple habits. Like the kings and queens of the 17th century, we all seek ways to find solace amidst the chaos of our busy lives. As we continue to explore the fascinating relationship between King Charles II and his snakes, it's impossible to ignore the deeper layers of symbolism that these creatures carried, especially when it comes to themes of sensuality and sexuality. While snakes are often associated with danger, mystery, and power, they also have a long history as symbols of fertility, sensuality, and sexual energy. In the context of the 17th century, a time when symbolism was woven into every aspect of life, Charles II's affinity for snakes took on a meaning beyond simple relaxation. It was tied to his personal identity, his romantic life, and the complex dynamics of his reign. Charles II, often known for his many mistresses and romantic entanglements, was a man whose personal life was as full of intrigue as his political one. His relationship with snakes, and particularly his fascination with their symbolism, has been interpreted by some historians as a subtle reflection of his own approach to sexuality. In many cultures, the snake is a symbol of desire and seduction, often linked to fertility and sexual power. The snake's movements, sinuous and hypnotic, are seen as embodying the sensual, hidden aspects of life. When Charles II spent time handling these creatures, he may have been engaging with that very symbolism, embracing the idea of power and allure, much as he did in his romantic life. The connection between snakes and sexuality was not lost on the people of the 17th century. Throughout history, the snake has been a symbol of temptation, most notably in the biblical story of Adam and Eve. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent is a tempter, offering Eve the forbidden fruit. This association of snakes with temptation, sensuality, and sexual awakening continued in Renaissance and Baroque art, where serpents were often used to convey themes of seduction and the complex relationship between desire and danger. In the case of Charles II, it's possible that his fondness for snakes was not just a peculiar hobby but a deeper connection to the sensual and alluring aspects of life. Historians still argue about the true nature of Charles II's relationship with snakes. Was it merely an eccentricity, or did it represent something more? Some scholars suggest that Charles's fascination with snakes was tied to his self-image as a charming and seductive monarch, someone whose appeal went beyond the royal court and into the hearts of his many lovers. Others argue that Charles II's snake-handling habits were more about seeking a form of peace and control in his personal life, away from the chaos of court politics and royal expectations. Regardless of his reasons, there's no denying that the symbolism of the snake in relation to sensuality and sexuality was something that the king likely understood and embraced. In addition to their sexual symbolism, snakes were also often seen as symbols of transformation and renewal. For Charles II, who had a reputation as a man of charm and wit, the snake could have represented his own capacity for reinvention. Throughout his reign, Charles II navigated the turbulent waters of the English monarchy with remarkable resilience, overcoming challenges and adapting to changing political landscapes. The snake, as a creature that sheds its skin and is reborn, may have served as a symbol of the king's ability to reinvent himself, especially after the hardships of exile and the restoration of the monarchy. As you drift into sleep tonight, think of the snake not only as a creature of mystery and power but also as a symbol of transformation, sensuality, and the hidden desires that sometimes influence our lives in ways we don't always recognize. Just as Charles II found relaxation and meaning in his connection with these creatures, we too can embrace the symbols in our lives that bring us a sense of power and self-understanding. The snake's quiet, deliberate movements remind us that there is always more beneath the surface, and in our own quiet moments, we too can discover deeper layers of meaning and connection. As we continue our journey through King Charles II's eccentricities and his love for snakes, it's impossible not to acknowledge the lasting influence he has had on popular culture. While Charles II's reign was filled with political challenges, courtly intrigue, and a royal lifestyle marked by his charm and playfulness, it is his eccentric habits, like his fondness for snakes, that have captured the imaginations of generations since his time. His image, though largely shaped by the dramatic political events of his rule, has been forever intertwined with his colorful and unconventional personality, which included a deep connection to the natural world. Charles II's passion for snakes and his playful, almost childlike interaction with them have been romanticized in many ways. His image has been immortalized in literature, films, and historical fiction as a monarch who wasn't afraid to break from tradition and indulge in personal pleasures. These representations often paint him as a king who balanced the weight of his duties with a sense of individuality and charm, a king whose life was just as colorful as the world around him. In these portrayals, his snakes are often presented as symbols of his unique character, his willingness to embrace the unusual and to find comfort in the unexpected. Over time, Charles II's reputation for eccentricity, including his relationship with animals like snakes, has been exaggerated for dramatic effect. Modern media often depicts him as the archetype of the carefree, pleasure-loving king, someone who could be both a serious ruler and a light-hearted man of the people. His penchant for snakes, particularly in the context of relaxation and personal comfort, has been woven into these portrayals, emphasizing the king's desire to step away from the pressures of his monarchy and enjoy his time on his own terms. Historians, however, still debate how much of Charles II's snake handling was a true therapeutic necessity versus a royal quirk designed to add color to his reign. Was his affection for snakes merely a way to relax after the exhausting affairs of state, or was it a form of quiet rebellion against the formal expectations of kingship? Some scholars believe that his snake collection was a way for him to distinguish himself from the more traditional monarchs of his time, while others suggest it was just one of many ways he managed the pressure of ruling. But whatever the reality, the image of Charles II and his snakes has become an enduring symbol of his reign. In modern pop culture, he is often remembered as a king who wasn't afraid to embrace his eccentricities, a man who found joy in the most unexpected places. His snakes, which initially served as a personal relaxation tool, have become a metaphor for his willingness to seek out unique forms of comfort and escape. In many ways, the story of Charles II and his snakes is a reminder that even in positions of immense power, moments of relaxation and personal peace are crucial. It's a story about how we all need a way to recharge, a way to disconnect from the demands of our lives, whether through a quiet moment with nature, a favorite hobby, or even something as unexpected as a snake. As you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, think of King Charles II in his quiet, private space, surrounded by his snakes. What might it have felt like for him, to find peace in such an unconventional companion? Perhaps, like the king, we all find moments of calm in the most unlikely places, and in those quiet moments, we are reminded that true relaxation and peace come not just from being away from work or responsibility, but from the things that bring us comfort, no matter how odd they might seem. As we near the end of this strange journey into King Charles II's love of snakes, it's time to reflect on how this eccentric hobby came to an eventual decline. While Charles II's reign was marked by an openness to his unique interests and a relaxed court, his successors were not as enamored with such peculiar practices. After Charles II's death in 1685, the shift in leadership also brought a change in the cultural atmosphere at the royal court, and many of the eccentric habits of the previous monarch began to fade. As time passed, the role of snakes in the royal court became less prominent, and the once popular reptile-filled rooms and the symbolism of the serpent were gradually phased out. King James II, Charles's brother and successor, had a very different personality from Charles II. James was more serious, and his reign didn't carry the same playful energy or personal indulgence. His focus was more on political matters, and the relaxed, nearly whimsical traditions of his brother's court were abandoned in favor of a more formal and austere royal environment. The royal obsession with exotic animals, including the fondness for snakes, started to wane. As a result, the presence of snakes in royal spaces faded into history, becoming more of a curiosity tied to a bygone era. Historians still debate the exact reasons for the decline of snake handling in the royal court. Was it a natural consequence of changing leadership styles, or did it reflect a broader societal shift away from the previous generation's flamboyant and extravagant tastes? Some scholars argue that the public's interest in these eccentric royal habits diminished, as the monarchy faced increasing political challenges and the focus shifted more toward governance than personal leisure. Others believe that with the shift from monarchy to constitutionalism, the image of royalty as powerful and unrestrained began to be replaced by a more subdued and responsible image of kingship, one where such eccentricities were no longer seen as fitting. Nevertheless, the decline of snake handling didn't just happen in the British court. Across Europe, the fascination with exotic animals and pets waned as well, in part due to the growing awareness of the dangers of such creatures. The rise of Enlightenment thinking and rationalism also contributed to the decline of practices that had once been tied to superstition and mysticism. The snake, once revered for its spiritual significance and mystical qualities, became less of a symbol of divine power and more of a curiosity, a part of the past rather than a living connection to the world of mythology and religion. While the practice of keeping snakes as royal companions faded from favor, it is still a part of Charles II's unique legacy. His affection for snakes, along with his other eccentricities, helped define the cultural and social character of his time. He remains a monarch whose reign was marked by both political upheaval and personal enjoyment. Today, we look back on Charles II as a king who broke from tradition and embraced what many would have considered odd or unconventional. His love for snakes is just one example of how he managed to balance the pressures of monarchy with the pursuit of personal peace and pleasure. In modern times, the idea of a monarch relaxing with snakes might seem quaint or even absurd, but in the context of Charles II's world, it was part of a broader trend toward royal eccentricity and personal indulgence. His story reminds us that even those in positions of immense power need outlets for relaxation and ways to cope with the demands of their roles. The once controversial image of a king surrounded by reptiles has become part of Charles II's colorful legacy, reminding us that every monarch has their quirks, and that sometimes, those quirks become the defining characteristics of their reign. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Charles II in his private chambers, the sound of quiet hissing accompanying his moments of solitude. Just as his eccentricities became a memorable part of his reign, remember that our own personal habits, no matter how unusual, are part of what makes us who we are. And just as Charles II found peace in his snakes, we too can find our moments of comfort in unexpected places, even when the world around us demands something different. As we come to the end of our exploration into the fascinating and peculiar habit of King Charles II and his love for snakes, it's time to reflect on how this and other eccentricities have shaped our view of royalty through the ages. From Charles II's fondness for reptiles to other monarchs who indulged in strange hobbies or personal quirks, we see that royalty, despite its outward appearance of grandeur, was often filled with oddities that made these figures all the more human. Charles II, in particular, left behind a legacy of both political and personal intrigue. His reign wasn't just about navigating the complex world of politics and war, it was also about how he chose to live his life, embracing unusual hobbies like snake handling to find moments of calm amidst the chaos. These eccentric habits became part of the legend of Charles II, a king who defied some of the more conventional expectations of royalty to create a persona that was both relatable and deeply memorable. We also see how Charles II's snake handling habit reflected his need for personal space in a world that demanded constant attention. The king, surrounded by courtiers, advisors, and political pressures, found comfort in a quiet room with snakes, a quiet contrast to the often noisy, chaotic life of the court. This need for a personal retreat resonates with people today. It's easy to forget that even the most powerful figures in history sought solace and mental peace through unusual, deeply personal rituals. For Charles II, it was his connection with snakes. For others, it might be music, walking in nature, or even the simple act of reading. Whatever the outlet, it's a reminder that we all need moments of quiet, whether it's for relaxation, reflection, or escape. As you drift into sleep tonight, think about the quirks and oddities in your own life, the little things that make you, you. Perhaps, like Charles II, we all find comfort in the strange and unexpected. These personal rituals, often invisible to the world around us, are a reminder of our need to balance the external demands of life with the quiet moments that help us recharge. Whether you're handling snakes or curling up with a favorite book, we all need those moments of peace to make it through our busy lives. What's fascinating about Charles II's story, and the stories of other quirky monarchs, is that these eccentricities humanize them, allowing us to see beyond the crown and the politics and into the personal world of someone who is also trying to make sense of life. Kings and queens, no matter how grand their titles, are also people with preferences, habits, and desires that shape their worlds. Charles II may have used snakes to relax, but his story reminds us that royalty, like the rest of us, needs their own ways to unwind and reflect. In the quiet space of your own thoughts tonight, as you settle into rest, think of Charles II and his strange, calming ritual with his snakes. Let it be a reminder that our own little quirks, our own habits of peace, are part of what makes life richer, even if those around us might never understand them.